Aboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Hey Amud Beis, starting with Ayin Hey Amud Aleph, 3 lines from the bottom. The Gemara brings the case in the Mishnah where they both want to enjoin the inner and the outer chutzner, and one or the other neglects to make the Eruv. In other words, one person in the inner or one person at the outer chutzner neglects to be part of the Eruv. The din in the Mishnah is that they are both usher, both the inner chutzner as well as the outer chutzner are usher to use the area of the chutzner to be metaltel in. Says the Mishnah that is quoted over here, Nasnu Eruvan b'mokom echad. They both, the inner and the outer chutzner, they place an Eruv together. They want to enjoin one chutzner with the other chutzner. V'shochach echad, and one neglected to be included, one person with either the inner or the outer. Bein mina pnimis, bein mina chitzoina. The din is that they're both oster. Says the Gemara, my mokom echad. What does it mean, mokom echad? That they place the Eruv in one place, in mokom echad. The Pasha understanding is in one of the houses. The Gemara says specifically it's talking about Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Rav Chitzoina, the outer one. Because if it was the inner chutzner, then the din would be different, as the Gemara will explain on Amud Beis. Why is it called the mokom echad if it's the outer one? Umay koru lo mokom echad, mokom demiyuchad l'shteihen. It's the place that is miyuchad to both. The hainu, not only for the outer chutzner, but even the inner chutzner who has access dris hasag regel through the outer chutzner. So that's why it's stated as mokom echad. On top of ayin hey amud beis. Tanya nami hochi. The Gemara brings a brisa that says when they placed the eruv, it was in one of the houses of the outer chutzner specifically. Nasnu eruvim b'chitzoina, v'shochach echad bein mina chitzoina bein mina pnimis v'lo erav shtein asuros, and that's exactly the din that we just quoted in the Mishnah. The brisa goes on to say, Nasnu eruvan b'pnimis v'shochach echad mina pnimis v'lo erav. If they place the eruv, however, in the inner chutzner, and one of the inner people of the inner chutzner neglected to then be part of that eruv, shtein asuros, not only will the inner chutzner be osir, but even the outer chutzner will be osir. Min hachitzoina v'le eruv, if one of the outer people of the outer chutzner neglected to be part of the eruv, shtein asuros, they will also be both osir, the inner as well as the outer chatzeros, divrei Rabbi Akiva, the shita of Rabbi Akiva. V'chachamim oimrim, they say bezu, in this latter case, where it was the outer person from the outer chutzner that did not be participating in that chutzner, in that erev chatzeros, then it's a different din than Rabbi Akiva said. They argue, pnimis muterevis v'chitzoina asura. The inner chutzner would be still muter, even though the outer one will be osir. Ask the Gemara, Omar le Rabbi Bar Chanan le Abaye, Maishno le Rabbanon de Amrei Pnimis Mutarois, Mishum de Achdo Doshu Mishtamsho. Why does the Chacham say that the inner one will still be muter, even though again we're talking about a scenario where they both participated in trying to make an Erev Chatzos with each other? Only one person from the outer chutzner did not participate, so therefore the outer one is osir, but says the Chacham, the inner one, will be mutter. Ask the Gemara, why would that be so? Because it's as if you can close off the door between the outer and the inner chutzner, allowing the inner chutzner to then have its usage and be independent. So therefore the inner chutzner will still be able to use the chutzner. So with that rationale, ask the Gemara, why not say the same thing according to Rabbi Akiva? The Rabbi Akiva nami, teicha dosha v'tishtamish. Say that the you should close the door and use the inner chutzner. The same way that the Chachamim say now it becomes independently used, is no longer going to be affected by the outer chutzner. So Rabbi Akiva should say the same thing, and therefore he should permit the inner chutzner from using the chutzner. Omar le. So he responded back, Eruv Margilo. The inner chutzner, where the Eruv is placed, that is Margil, the outer chutzner, whereby the outer chutzner becomes used to, it gets shaychus with the inner chutzner, and therefore the inner chutzner cannot divest itself from the outer chutzner. Ask the Gemara the obvious question, if you're going to say that in regards to why Rabbi Akiva says that the inner chutzner is still osir, then be consistent. L'Rabbananami Eru Margileh. Say the same thing in regards to the Rabbanan. The same rationale that you just said, that the inner chutzner where the Eruv is placed will then be margil the outer chutzner, whereby the outer chutzner has a shaychis to the inner chutzner, and the inner chutzner cannot then divest itself from the outer chutzner, then that should be the reason why it should be osir as well, according to the Chachamim. Says the Gemara, no, the Amra law letikune shitaftich v'lo li'ivusi. The inner chutzner has an argument to the outer chutzner and says that I was mishtatef together with you to make an eruv for my benefit, but not for you to then ruin me. And therefore, here you're going to then ruin my usage of the inner chutzner. So therefore, he could, yes, divest himself from the outer chutzner. Ask the Gemara again, be consistent. L'Rabbi Akiva nami tema l'tikuni shitaftich v'lo livusi. That I made a shituv, I made an eruv together with you, in order to be misakein, in order to then repair, but not to then be an ivus, not to then be a something that will then go against me. So therefore, that should also then be an argument why the inner chutzner should be able to be used, according to Rabbi Akiva as well. Says the Gemara, no, the amro, because the outer chutzner can say, lo, mevatlina loch v'shusi, we can mevatel our rights to you, and therefore by giving up our rights to you, therefore we are not, you want to have the claim that we're coming to ruin you, and therefore it's not an ivus at all, since we can mevatel our reshus to you. Says the Gemara, again, be consistent the other way. V'rabbanon, why don't you say the same thing? Says the Gemara, because ein bitul reshus mechatzer lechatzer. The Rabbanon hold that you cannot go ahead and mevatel reshus from one chatzer to the other, and therefore it is an ivus, and that's why they have the claim, the inner chatzer against the outer chatzer. I made the erev chatzeros letikuni v'lo leivusi. So therefore they have the right to relinquish themselves and divest themselves from the outer chatzer, whereby they're independent and can be used. They can use their inner chatzer. Says the Gemara, the following suggestion: Lema Shmuel v'Rabbi Yochanan beplukta d'Rabban v'Rabbi Akiva kamifliki. We know that from the earlier in the parak that Shmuel held that one cannot mevatel reshus from chatzer lechatzer. Yet Rabbi Yochanan says that you could mevatel your reshus from chatzer to chatzer. So let us suggest that this is the same machlokes that we have over here between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim. The Shmuel Omar Kirabbanon, Rabbi Yochanan Omar Kirabbi Akiva. Shmuel, who says that you cannot mevatel reshus mechatzer lechatzer, he goes together with the Chachamim over here that say the same thing. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan, who says you can yes mevatel reshus lechatzer, will then line up with Rabbi Akiva. Omar lach Shmuel, Shmuel will say to you, Ana da Amri, I that said that you can go ahead and not mevatel, one cannot mevatel reshus mechatzer lechatzer. Afilu leRabbi Akiva, I can even say though, according to Rabbi Akiva, I can say the same sheet as Rabbi Akiva over here as well, because Adkan loy ka'am Rabbi Akiva hocha ela b'shtei chatzeros zu lifni mizu da asron hadoti. When does Rabbi Akiva say over here that you can go ahead and mevatel the reshus? That's because each chatzer is going to oser the outer chatzer is going to oser the inner one. That means because you have two chatzeros, one inner and one outer. The inner one we said is a drisas regel with the outer one. When they make they try to combine, there can be oser on the other one. So therefore, on this scenario, Rabbi Akiva says that you can go ahead and mevatel reshus. Aval Hasam, but in the case that I said you cannot mevatel reshus, says Shmuel, ki kol asron ahadodi. There, Mika Asr Hadadim. There, because it's side by side Chatzeros, they are not going to Asr each other. They're two Chatzeros that are independent from each other. They have an entrance in between, but they're not going to Oyser on the other one. Therefore, says Shmuel, one cannot Mevatel Reshus from Chatzer LeChatzer. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, Rabbi Yochanan, who said that his din is that you could Mevatel Reshus over there, says, Ana da Amri Afilu Rabban. I can even go like the Rabban over here that say you cannot Mevatel Reshus, because there's a distinction. Ad kan loy ka Amri Rabban hacha ela da Amra lo ad Mevatles li ka asras aloy. Because the Rabban have an argument over here that the inner Chatzer can say that until you Mevatel your Reshus to me, it's going to be also to me. So therefore, it's not to my benefit that you mevatel reshus, and therefore I want to relinquish my rights even without a bit of reshus. Aval hasam, but over there, mika asris Allah. But over there, who asers, and therefore who's asering on you, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan says you can go ahead and mevatel reshus. It's not going to be to the other one's disadvantage. And therefore, again, Shmuel can maintain even like Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Yochanan can say I can maintain like the Rabbanon. Now the Gemara quotes the latter part of the Mishnah that says, "V'im hoyu shel yechidim." If these two chatzeros are being resided by individuals, a individual resides in the inner chatzer and another individual resides in the outer chatzer. So the Mishnah says then there's no, according to the Tanakhama at least, that there's no problem that the inner chatzer will not oyser the outer chatzer, since the inner chatzer does not need an erev chatzeros, it is mutter. So therefore, will not be oyser the outer chotzer. Says the Gemara, Omer of Yosef, Tani Rebbe. Rebbe taught in the following brayso. Rav Yosef says, Hoyu Gimel Asuin. If there are three, there are oyser. In other words, not only in a scenario when you have two in the inner chotzer and one in the outer chotzer, if they didn't make an eruv, then we'll say that the two will then oyser the outer chotzer. But even when you have only one in the inner chutzner and two in the outer chutzner, still we will say that the inner chutzner will oyser the outer chutzner. Omar lohu Rabibi. Rabibi said to the chacham that were present, Lo tatzi sulei. Do not listen to Rav Yosef that this was indeed taught by Rabbi in the brayso, because Anna Amrisa Nihilei. I said it to him. This statement, and I said it in the name of Ada bar Ahava. And the explanation why you cannot have a scenario where there's one living in the inner chutzner and two in the outer chutzner. If you do, then the inner chutzner will oyser the outer chutzner, is because I call the outer chutzner to be rabim. In other words, I will say that the same way that the outer chutzner is rabim, is more than one, then I will also, the onlookers might think that the inner chutzner also has rabim. Since the inner chutzner is only one and does not make an eruv, they will make a mistake and think that you don't need to make an eruv. They don't know that there's only one inside. They might think there's two inside. So therefore, according to this opinion of Rav Ada bar Ahava, even when you only have one living in the inner chutzner, he will oyser the two living in the outer chutzner, so a mistake should not be made. Rav Yosef, Morei da Avram. He says, Master of Avram, Ribono shel Olam. He's in wonderment about his own mistake. For after all, Rav Yosef, again, he was sick. He became ill once, and he forgot his learning. When he then became better and then regained his learning, he realized his mistake. Rabim berabi ichlifli. I switched the word rabim with Rebbe. Rabim berebi ichlifli. Instead of saying rabim, I said Rebbe. I thought it was Rebbe that taught this, but indeed the whole reasoning over here was the rabim. Since if you have one inside and two on the outside, then the two on the outside are viewed as rabim. They can also make the mistake and think that the inner one is rabim. Ushmul Omar, Shmuel is choylek on this din of Rav Ada bar Ahava, and he says it's not going to be that we make a gezeira when you have one in the inner chutzner to be oiser on two on the outer chutzner. No. La'olam mutaros. Unless there's going to be two in the inner chutzner, they will not oiser the outer chutzner, and therefore he's choylek on this din. Rabbi Elazar agrees with Shmuel that when you have one in the inner chutzner and two in the outer chutzner, he's not going to be oiser the outer chutzner. However, Rabbi Elazar adds, "V'nachri harehu kerabim." If the inner chutzner is resided by a nachri, then that nachri will oiser the outer chutzner. Ask the Gemara, Maishna Yisrael Delay Osar. Why do you maintain when it comes to a Yisrael that lives in the inner chutzner, and there's two that live in the outer chutzner, that he's not oiser? Is because the yada. For somebody who knows that there's only one in the inner chutzner, knows. Uman de lo yada saver eruve eruv. And one who does not know that there's only one thinks that an eruv was made. So there's not going to be a mistake with this scenario of one living in the inner chutzner to be oiser on the outer chutzner. So nachri nami. Therefore, say the same thing when it comes to a nachri who lives in the inner chutzner. Amrin and the yada. Somebody who knows that he lives in the inner chutzner alone. So therefore, they know, and therefore they don't have a problem because he's not going to oiser on the outer chutzner who has the Jews living in the outer chutzner. The lo yada, somebody who does not know and thinks that a Jew lives together with the nachri in the inner chutzner, savra or gure ugar. They'll think that he ultimately was renting his chelek to the Jew, because since you have a Jew living with the nachri in the inner chutzner, which has a drisas regel with the Jew that's living in the outer chutzner, so it's really two Jews that are sharing together with the nachri. They have to be the oiger. They have to rent from the nachri. So the one who doesn't know will think that they rented from the nachri. The nachri then leased out his chelek to the Jew, and therefore there's not going to be a problem. No mistake should be made, and therefore there's not going to be a problem of this leniency. Says the Gemara, no stam nachri isa. If there is a nachri, then the oiger mifam boy, then indeed they would speak about it. And therefore, if indeed a person will think that there may be a Jew that lives in the same chutzner as the nachri in the inner chutzner, and he will not think that he rented it out to him because people speak about it. And since he didn't hear people speaking about it, he's not aware that he doesn't think that it was rented out either. And therefore, that's why you cannot have one nachri in the inner chutzner, because he will oiser on the two that live in the outer chutzner. Says the Gemara, the following scenario of Erev Chatzeros. Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Shmuel. Asara batim ze lifnei mizeh. If you have one chutzner that has different houses in that chutzner, and you also have on one side of that chutzner one house that shares the chutzner, but then it has not just one house, it has several houses, 10 houses, one that is connected to the other one, which means that really that the inner house has a drisas regel through all the other 9 houses to get to the chutzner. So the Gemara says over here, Pnimi noisin es eruvoy v'day. It's enough for the inner the inner house of the 10 houses to then contribute to the Erev Chatzeros with the other houses of the Chatzer, and that's sufficient. In other words, you don't need all 10 houses to contribute to the Erev Chatzeros. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, afilu chitzoin, even the outer Chatzer needs to contribute. Ask the Gemara, chitzoin, beis sharhu. How can the chitzon need to be contributing? We know that a beis shar does not need to contribute to an Erev Chatzeros, and all of these 9 batim are only beis shar of the innermost bias. Says the Gemara, and you're right. Chitzer shel pnimi. What he means to say is the outer one of the inner one, meaning the 9th house, that has to contribute also, as well as the inner 10th one. Ask the Gemara, what's the machlokes over here? Says the Gemara, Mar Savar Beishar the Yachid Shmei Beishar. Shmuel holds that the Beishar of a Yachid, namely the 9th house, is a Beishar of the Yachid of the 10th house. And that, therefore, is a Beishar which does not need to contribute. Therefore, the only one that needs to contribute to the Erev Chatzeros is the most inner bias, namely the 10th house. Umar Savar Lo Shmei Beishar. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says that we don't say that it has the din of a base shar if it's the house of a base shar of a yachid. Therefore, it's only going to be if it's going to be 2 of them, and that's why you have to go ahead and contribute to from both the most inner one, the 10th, as well as the 9th one, to contribute to the Erev Chatzeros, and only after one from the 8th onwards will be considered to be a base shar.